Hey everyone, and welcome back to Book Summary Podcast for another deep dive.
Glad to be back.
Today we're taking a look at Force of Nature by Jane Harper.
Oh, yeah, a fantastic thriller.
Yeah,
I think anyone who liked The Dry will really love this one, too.
definitely. And if you haven't read either of those books, don't worry, we'll catch you up as we go.
Yeah.
And even if you don't end up reading the book, you'll still get a lot out of today's deep dive.
Absolutely.
So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started.
It sounds good.
So Force of Nature plunges us into the isolated Urline Ranges in Australia.
Right away, the setting itself is almost like a character.
Totally. It's this dense, unforgiving forest, and it immediately creates a sense of unease. You know, like anything could happen out there.
Yeah, and then you layer on the fact that this is the same setting as The Dry, where serial killer Martin Kovac terrorized the area years ago.
Exactly. He
Yeah.
targeted young women, and while he died in prison, there's still those lingering questions.
Yeah.
You know, was there another victim? Did he have a hidden cabin out there somewhere?
It's like the wilderness itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen.
Okay, so into this already charged atmosphere walks a group of colleagues from Bailey Tennants, a financial firm in Melbourne.
They're on a corporate retreat led by Executive Adventures. You know, the
Hmm.
kind of thing that's supposed to be team building and leadership training.
All while enjoying the great outdoors, right? But as you can imagine, things don't exactly go according to plan.
Not at all.
Let's start with the characters, because they're all so well developed, and each one brings something different to the story.
Agreed.
So we have Alice Russell. She's this high-powered executive, very ambitious, and maybe not always playing by the rules.
Right, and there's Jill Bailey, Alice's colleague, and also the sister of Daniel Bailey, who is the CEO of their company.
Interesting dynamic there.
For sure. And then we have Lauren Shaw, a mid-level manager, who's dealing with some past trauma, and she's particularly worried about her teenage daughter, Rebecca, who's going through her own struggles.
Yeah, and let's not forget the McKinsey twins, Bree and Beth.
Total opposite.
Bree is the high-achieving intern trying to make a good impression, while Beth is battling addiction and seems to resent her sister's success.
So right away, we've got this mix of personalities, each with their own secrets and baggage.
And as they navigate the challenging terrain, both physically and emotionally, those true natures start to come out.
Yeah, we see power dynamics, shifting resentments bubbling to the surface, and this growing sense of unease that goes beyond just being lost in the woods.
And then things take a really creepy turn.
What happens?
They stumble upon a dilapidated cabin hidden deep in the forest.
Oh, no.
I know, right? And remember those rumors about Kovac's hidden cabin?
Mm.
Well, this could be it. And to make matters worse, they find something truly unsettling, unmarked graves.
Wow, that's chilling. It's like Harper is weaving together the past and present so that the shadow of Martin Kovac hangs over everything.
Exactly. And that discovery really amplifies their fears. They're surrounded by this vast wilderness, but they feel trapped.
Like the walls are closing in.
Meanwhile, Alice's behavior becomes increasingly erratic.
What do you mean?
Well, she makes this cryptic phone call to Falk, a federal police officer who we know from The Dry.
Okay, I remember him.
Right, she's hinting that something is very wrong, but the call is muffled, so Falk is left with more questions than answers.
That's frustrating.
And shortly after that call, Alice vanishes from the cabin.
Oh, wow. So now we have a missing person on top of everything else.
Exactly, and it throws everyone into chaos. What did Alice know? Was she a target or was she running from something?
The suspense is building.
The search efforts intensify, time is running out, and that sense of dread becomes almost suffocating.
And then what happens?
Then comes the bombshell. Alice is dead.
Oh my gosh.
But it's not a simple discovery. Bree, the seemingly innocent intern, is found to have been involved in moving Alice's body.
Hold on, how is Bree involved?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
The lines between victim and perpetrator start to blur, and we're left wondering, why did Bree move the body? Was she protecting someone, or was there something more sinister going on?
Now I really want to know what happens next.
Right, and that's just the beginning. As the investigation unfolds, we start to see the tangled web of relationships within the group unraveled.
Like family secrets, past betrayals, all coming back to haunt them.
Exactly. And that's what makes Force of Nature so gripping. It's not just a thriller. It's about the weight of guilt, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring power of the past.
These characters are forced to confront their own demons and the consequences of their choices.
And speaking of the past, the truth behind Alice's death isn't straightforward. Remember that cryptic phone call she made to Falk?
Yeah.
Well, turns out she had stumbled upon some incriminating information about the Baileys, something that could destroy their family business and their reputations.
So she was a threat.
Exactly, and she was determined to expose them no matter the cost.
But Alice wasn't the only one with a secret.
Right. Jill confided in Lauren, revealing the true nature of her loyalty to her brother Daniel.
Interesting. What did she say?
She confessed that he had been manipulating her for years, holding something over her head that forced her to do his bidding, even if it went against her own moral compass.
Wow. So Jill, despite her position of power, was actually a victim of her brother's controlling nature.
And this revelation sheds a whole new light on her actions during
Yeah.
the retreat.
It all starts to make sense. Her insistence on staying with the group, her frustration with Alice.
She was desperate to maintain control to prevent Alice from escaping and exposing the truth.
And that desperation leads to that confrontation between Jill and Alice.
That night, when Alice slipped away from the cabin, determined to get back to Melbourne, Jill caught up with her.
This doesn't sound good.
It's not in a moment of panic she struck Alice, causing her to fall and hit her head.
So Jill is responsible for Alice's death.
Whether intentional or not, her actions had fatal consequences.
And that's where Bree gets involved.
Right? She stumbles upon the scene, finding Jill standing over Alice's lifeless body, terrified and confused. She agrees to help Jill move the body, hoping to protect her sister and avoid getting entangled in this whole mess.
It's a terrible decision, but understandable given the circumstances.
And it's a decision that haunts her. She knows what she did was wrong, but she's trapped, unable to come clean without implicating herself and her sister.
So what happens next?
Well, the police are closing in, and the truth becomes increasingly difficult to hide.
Oh, walls are closing in.
Exactly. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah, wait.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it, and we'll see you back here soon for more Force of Nature.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Force of Nature.
We left off with a lot of unanswered questions.
Like, why was Bree so terrified? What happened to Alice? And where does Beth fit into all of this?
Beth, yeah, she's a bit of a wild card, isn't she?
Throughout the retreat, she's presented as volatile, unpredictable, struggling with addiction.
And that resentment towards Bree, like there's some serious baggage there.
Exactly. It seems like their relationship goes way back.
Some kind of competition or maybe even betrayal that's been simmering for years.
Right. And as we delve deeper into their past, we uncover some pretty big revelations.
Revelations that shed light on their current dynamic.
For sure.
And let's not forget that creepy cabin where they found the unmarked graves,
That place is like a magnet for darkness.
drawing all these characters into its web of secrets.
It's like the past is literally haunting the present.
And those financial records that Folk and Carmen were after?
The ones that could incriminate the Baileys,
Right, they're still missing.
adding another layer of mystery to the story.
Did Alice take those records with her? Were they destroyed? Or are they still out there somewhere waiting to be discovered?
Good question.
And then there's Alice's daughter, Margot.
Those explicit pictures of her that ended up online.
It's just awful. Was it a cruel prank, or was there something more sinister behind it?
And what about Daniel Bailey's behavior?
He admits to confronting his son Joel about the photos.
But he keeps that information from his sister Jill. Why?
And how did those pictures end up online, if Joel claims to have deleted them?
Everyone seems to have something to hide.
As the investigation progresses, those secrets start to unravel, revealing the complex web of relationships and motivations.
It's like a tangled knot that needs to be untangled.
Speaking of tangled knots, let's go back to that flashback of Lauren and Alice's school days at McAllister.
That prestigious boarding school with its emphasis on outdoor activities and that challenging full-year camp.
No TV, no phone calls, just handwritten letters home.
Talk about a different time.
And during one of those outdoor challenges, Lauren was really struggling.
Feeling lost and vulnerable.
And that's when Alice stepped in, offering support and guidance.
It seemed to forge a bond between them.
Despite their very different personalities.
That shared history becomes complicated in the present.
Right, they clash constantly, their past resentments and unspoken tensions simmering beneath the surface.
Like they're both haunted by that shared past.
Carrying the weight of unspoken words in unresolved conflicts.
And this tension reaches a boiling point when Alice decides to leave the cabin alone.
She's desperate to get back to Melbourne. She claims it's because of those photos of Margot.
But is there something else driving her?
Well, here's where things get really interesting. Alice had stumbled upon incriminating evidence about the Baileys.
Specifically about Daniel's involvement in some shady financial dealings.
So Alice held a dangerous secret one that threatened the entire Bailey empire.
And she was determined to expose them.
No matter the cost.
But remember, Alice wasn't the only one with a secret.
Jill confided in Lauren, revealing the true nature of her loyalty to Daniel.
What does she say?
She admitted that he had been manipulating her for years, holding something over her that forced her to do his bidding.
Even when it went against her own moral compass.
It's a heartbreaking realization. Jill, despite her position of power, was ultimately a victim of her brother's controlling nature.
And this revelation really changes our understanding of her actions during the retreat.
Her insistence on staying with the group, her frustration with Alice.
It all makes sense.
She was desperate to maintain control.
To prevent Alice from escaping and exposing the truth.
And it's this desperation that leads to that tragic confrontation between Jill and Alice.
That night when Alice slipped away from the cabin.
Determined to get back to Melbourne, Jill caught up with her.
Oh no.
In a moment of panic, she struck Alice.
Causing her to fall and hit her head.
Whether intentional or not, Jill's actions resulted in Alice's death.
And this is where Bree comes in.
She stumbles upon the scene, finding Jill standing over Alice's lifeless body.
Poor Bree.
Terrified and confused, she agrees to help Jill move the body.
Hoping to protect your sister and avoid getting entangled in this mess.
It's a terrible decision, but one that's born out of fear and misguided loyalty.
Bree, already burdened by her own troubled past, is now weighed down by the guilt of concealing a death.
And it's a decision that haunts her.
She knows what she did was wrong.
But she's trapped in a web of deceit.
Unable to come clean without implicating herself and her sister.
As the police close in, the truth becomes increasingly difficult to hide.
The walls are closing in.
Remember how they found Alice's phone?
Yeah.
It was Jill who took it after Alice's death.
And it was her voice on that muffled voicemail that Falk received.
She's trying to frame
It
out.
seemed like she was still alive and deliberately avoiding contact.
She was buying herself some time.
Trying to come up with a plausible explanation for Alice's disappearance.
But as the evidence mounts against her, that carefully constructed facade starts to crumble,
It's like a house of cards.
just waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it all down.
And that breeze comes in the form of a seemingly insignificant piece of evidence.
What was it?
A bracelet found near Alice's body.
A bracelet?
Remember those colorful bracelets that Rebecca Shaw was making?
Wait, one of those bracelets ended up near Alice's body.
It turns out that one of Rebecca's bracelets somehow ended up near Alice's body, placing Jill at the scene of the crime.
Oh, wow. So even though Jill didn't physically kill Alice,
She's still responsible for her death.
and in a tragic twist of fate, she's arrested for manslaughter.
Her carefully constructed world crumbling around her.
Actions have consequences.
Sometimes those consequences are far more reaching than we could ever imagine.
But what about the others?
How do they cope with the aftermath of this tragedy?
Lauren, racked with guilt over her harsh words to Alice, seeks solace in the wilderness.
She finds a strange comfort in the vastness and indifference of nature.
Realizing that her own struggles pale in comparison to the loss of a life.
And she vows to make amends with her daughter, Rebecca.
Who's battling an eating disorder.
It's a powerful moment of realization for her.
Sometimes it takes a tragedy to put things into perspective.
To realize what truly matters.
And Bree, burdened by her involvement in concealing Alice's death, decides to come clean to the police.
She's hoping to find some peace.
And finally break free from her sister's toxic influence.
There's a glimmer of hope for redemption, even amidst all this darkness.
And Falk, reflecting on his own strained relationship with his deceased father, finds a newfound appreciation for the complexities of family dynamics.
And the importance of forgiveness.
He decides to reach out to his father's old friend.
Hoping to learn more about the man he never truly understood.
It's a beautiful moment of closure.
Showing that even in death, we can still find ways to connect with those we've lost.
And find meaning in their absence.
As we move towards the final part of our deep dive,
We're left with this lingering question.
how do we navigate the complexities of guilt redemption and the enduring power of the past? All right, so we're back for the final part of our Force of Nature deep dive.
We've uncovered a lot of twists and turns, but there's still some loose ends to tie up.
Especially surrounding Alice's death. The truth is out there, but it raises even more questions about guilt responsibility and the choices we make.
The last time we left off with Jill Bailey being arrested for manslaughter, but the full story of Alice's final hours is still a bit murky.
Right, let's rewind to that intense scene where Falk is trying to pull Lauren back from the edge of Mirror Falls. She's teetering on the brink, consumed by guilt and despair.
And she keeps repeating that Alice was right.
Clearly she's blaming herself for something, but we don't know what yet.
It's heartbreaking to watch, especially knowing that Lauren is carrying the weight of past trauma. We saw glimpses of it in those flashbacks to McAllister, but the full extent of that experience is about to come to light.
And it completely changes our understanding of Lauren's actions.
So what happened?
During that school camp, Lauren accidentally caused the death of a classmate.
Wow. That's a heavy secret to carry for decades. It must have profoundly shaped her sense of self-worth and her relationships, especially with Alice.
Their shared experience at McAllister created a bond, but also a lot of unspoken tension, a mix of admiration, resentment, guilt, and understanding.
So when Alice brought up those explicit photos of Margot, it triggered a wave of panic in Rocky. Lauren and she saw parallels between her past actions and the potential consequences for Margot.
Right, and that's why she lashed out at Alice, accusing her of being manipulative and self-centered.
It was a moment of raw emotion fueled by years of suppressed pain and guilt. And tragically, it led to Alice's fatal fall.
But there's a devastating twist to this whole thing. Lauren, in her panicked state, returned to the cabin and found it empty. She assumed Alice had gone off on her own, and she stumbled upon Alice's phone, leading to that frantic call to Falk.
But Alice was still alive.
Yes, she was unconscious and injured, but she had managed to crawl away from the scene, seeking shelter in a nearby crevice.
If only Lauren had looked a little harder if she had stayed with Alice, things might have been different.
It's a heartbreaking realization, and it shows how fear and panic can cloud our judgment, leading to devastating consequences.
So ultimately, Alice's death wasn't a direct result of the fall itself, but of exposure. She was weakened by the head injury and the cold, and she succumbed to hypothermia, dying alone and lost in the wilderness.
It's a poignant reminder of the power and indifference of nature, how easily a simple misstep can have tragic consequences.
The truth brings closure to the mystery, but it also leaves us grappling with these lingering questions. How do we deal with the weight of guilt and responsibility, especially when the lines are blurred?
And how do we make peace with the past, even when it haunts us with what-ifs and regrets?
Force of Nature doesn't offer easy answers to these questions, but it provides a profound exploration of the human condition. These characters, flawed and complex, demonstrate both the capacity for darkness and the potential for redemption.
What really stood out to me was that sense of interconnectedness, how our choices ripple outward and impact those around us sometimes in ways we could never have imagined.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of loss and tragedy, there's always the possibility for growth, understanding, and forgiveness.
And that's what makes Force of Nature such a compelling and thought-provoking read. It stays with you long after you finished it, urging you to reflect on your own choices, your relationships, and the intricacies of the human heart.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Force of Nature. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the book, what resonated with you the most. Share your insights and interpretations in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Book Summary Podcast for more in-depth discussions and analyses of your favorite books. We'll see you in our next deep dive.